Hey guys, welcome to Hip Use History, where we get all kinds of dizzy for the learning. And today we're going to bang out a little bit of the Scopes trial so you can know the basic understanding of the case, but more importantly, have really the theme and the thesis for the 1920s. So hang out, let's see if we can't learn about a little bit of the evolution and the schools. 1925. Let's start with the theme, guys, and especially if you're writing, on a thematic essay or something like that, you always want to start with a big idea. And the big idea of the 1920s is change. Generally what I try to do is I try to group like the 1920s and the 1960s together, because both of those decades are really type of kind of conflict decades, where you have the previous generation bumping up against the new generation. Of course, in the 1960s, this would be the hippies kind of bumping up against the World War II generation in the 1950s. In the 1920s, we have kind of a fundamentalist kind of Christian culture that's bumping up more of a modernist culture. And we can see this in the 1920s through lots of different episodes, whether it's kind of the woman episode and talking about women's rights and flappers and cultural norms, or maybe the African American community with the Great Migration and the explosion of jazz and kind of a new kind of African American culture in the 1920s. But in terms of the Scopes trial, we're really talking about religion. And the first thing that you want to know is that it's not really a real trial. It's a real trial, like there's a judge and such, but it's not that the facts of the case happen naturally. It's a staged trial. It was originally put together to generate publicity for Dayton, Tennessee, to try to get visitors to go there to actually make money. And the American Civil Liberties Union was using it as a test case to really push the envelope in terms of secular education, which is like a non-religious education. So facts of the case. In the 1920s, there's a law in Tennessee. It's called the Butler Act, which specifically forbids the teaching of evolution in state-sponsored schools. So John Scopes isn't actually a full-time teacher. John Scopes of the Scopes Monkey Trial is a substitute, but he has subbed science classes, and he's going to be the test case. He agrees to be the test case. In fact, he couldn't even specifically remember the lesson he taught on evolution. All they knew was he used a certain science textbook, and in that science textbook there was information about evolution. So there we go. We have a trial. We have a guy who seemingly violated the Butler Act by teaching evolution to children, and the state is now going to bring him to court to trial. So in a sense, it's religion versus science. I mean, that's kind of the big idea. Now the lawyers, you have Darrow, who's going to defend Scopes. Darrow was an ACLU lawyer. He was one of the biggest defense lawyers in the nation, and he was really seen as the force of the modernists or the secularists, the humanists, the ones that, in a sense, want to take religion out of state-sponsored schools. And then on the other side, we have another famous dude who's William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan had ran for president a number of times as a Democrat, and he is a believer in the Bible. He is a believer in kind of old-time, fundamental values. So at the end of the day, that's what the trial becomes. There is kind of a famous episode towards the end of the trial where the lawyer for the state, who's William Jennings Bryan, takes the stand to defend the Bible against the questioning of Darrow. And the story goes that it got a little bit embarrassing for Mr. Bryan after a few questions about people being swallowed up by whales and such. And he, being a literalist, would have to say, yes, I believe that Jonah was swallowed by the whale. And in a sense, it kind of destroyed him. He actually died only a few weeks after the trial. Scopes was eventually found guilty of violating the law. He did violate that law, and he was fined $100, which was later overturned on a technicality. But all of that really doesn't matter. All that really matters is that we had a case that tested religion in schools, and as we move forward, we're moving towards more of a science-based education rather than a biblical-based education. So we can do more in the 1960s when we get to Engel versus Vitale and we get the federal government's hands in this cookie jar. But right now, you probably have enough to pound yourself through a few sentences. The Scopes trial, 1925, the Butler Act. Yeah, baby. All right, make sure you click Hip Use History and you subscribe, because you could free a unicorn and such. And there's like a billion videos. So you should be watching them and growing your brain like a chia pet, baby. All right, there we go. Remember, guys, where attention goes, energy flows. So make sure you're focused in your life.